Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Transport Innovation Summit. I'm Joshua Minchin, the Assistant Editor of Intelligent Transport, and I'll be your moderator for the next hour or so as we begin our final session of day 4. It's absolutely flown by yet again, as the whole week has, but I'm really excited about this one. It should be really, really interesting. I'm delighted to be joined by Haya Fawad from Civic Pedestrian and Rogelio Pardo from Urban Movement Labs to discuss artificial intelligence and applications in urban mobility. Now, I'll pass over to our panelists in just a second to introduce themselves in a little bit more detail. But just before we get started, just another reminder from me, just to get your questions in during the presentation. We'll answer as many as we possibly can, and you can pose those through the chat box on the right-hand side. So any questions, points for discussion, opinions, throw them in there, and we'll discuss as many as we can over the course of the next hour or so. But as promised, a chance for our panelists to introduce themselves in a bit more detail. So, Haya, perhaps you'd like to go first.
Yeah, sure. I'm Haya Fawad. I work at Civic Pedestrian. I look after market growth, strategy, and policy. Just to introduce Pedestrian, we're a world leader in transportation robotics and mobility. Spun out of MIT in 2013. We basically designed, engineered, and built and operated the world's smartest, safest shared e-scooters. We launched this shared mobility division in July of last year, and since then we're now actually operating in 50 cities in 8 countries.
Perfect, Rogelio, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Sure thing. So my name is Rogelio Pardo. I work here as the program director at Urban Movement Labs. My job here at Urban Movement Labs is to facilitate. Well, let me just share. Urban Movement Labs is here in Los Angeles. My job is to work with private mobility companies here in the city to help facilitate pilot projects in a way that helps foster an understanding of new technologies coming in the mobility space, understanding how they can be used to address existing challenges in Los Angeles, refine their operations model to address any new challenges that may come about, and help cities understand what new technologies are coming so they can kind of get the wheel spinning to prepare the regulatory landscape in a more collaborative way than we saw with micromobility. Urban Movement Labs is really founded as a way to kind of prevent the same challenges that occurred when micromobility first showed up in the scene from repeating themselves, right? We want to create a landscape where there's more collaboration between private industry and the city so that there's a kind of a more collaborative environment in bringing technologies into the mobility environment instead of having two really opposing entities in Los Angeles instead.
Thank you very much. Yeah, you've raised a really good point there, and that's something that I think we'll return to a few times throughout the session. But I always like to start with a really, really big question just to get things going. In your opinion, how is AI changing urban mobility at the moment? And that's to both of you, so whoever would like to jump in there.
Yeah, go for it, Haya.
All right, great. So happy to jump in. So basically, AI is really helping scooters to become good citizens. So there are different components to that. I'm going to start talking a little bit about vehicle safety, which is more on the hardware side. How can you, through AI, assure vehicle safety, especially in a shared environment? Because in a shared environment, you have those scooters in the road. How can you make sure that they're safe to ride every day? Of course, you're not going to have a mechanic standing by to check after every ride if every component of the vehicle is still functioning okay. And basically what AI does is to ensure that a shared scooter is safe to ride every day. We have at SP onboard intelligent, which are basically sensors and 5 microcomputers. This allows the vehicles to inspect themselves continuously through the ride and every 30 minutes when not on ride, and basically remove themselves from service if any issue was to basically occur. This allows you to really build a picture and have full control of where and when the vehicles are likely to need a repair or likely to need an inspection. So it's basically a sort of autonomous maintenance, which leads to a better safety for riders and for the broader community. So that is one bit, which is really the vehicle safety, that ability to control all the components that are in the vehicles through those microcomputers and not wait for, a mechanic to do a check every week, and to make sure that those earlier failures of vehicles are actually avoided. So that is one bit of it. The second bit of it is about really the vehicle health. I'm still in the hardware bit, right? So there's like the vehicle safety, but then there's the vehicle health. When you do this, you're making actually sure that the health of the vehicle is the vehicle is self-regulating, basically. So the onboard AI is self-regulating the vehicle performance. So for example, the vehicle would alter its power output to control components temperatures to avoid any failures, which means better for our riders, better for our business as well, because it actually extends the lifespan. And that is, a very important sustainability point. So those 2 points that I mentioned mean that like the scooter can actually last much longer, because it's you're extending its lifespan. You're avoiding to have to wait until things break by actually proactively, continuously monitoring all those components. So our vehicles have a lifespan of plus 5 years. So that's how AI is kind of reshaping the safety of the for the users and for the vehicle. There is another bit of it which is really the pedestrian safety, and this is like the latest technology that we are introducing. It's called Pedestrian Defense, and that is more about like the safety of different road users and how the vehicle behaves on the public right of way.
Thank you very much. Sounds absolutely fascinating, and we'll get our teeth in some of those points in just a second. But Helio, from your side, how is AI changing the landscape when it comes to mobility?
Yeah, Haya raised a really great kind of application for AI in transportation. I feel like for a long time, AI was really seen as a way to improve ITS infrastructure, how signals spoke to each other, how to make things more efficient for moving vehicles, right? And we're really in this space in mobility and technology where we're thinking about like, okay, well, how can we apply all this technology to move things, move people, and put movement at the forefront rather than movement of vehicles. So a couple scenarios that I want to bring up, in addition to what Haya brought up, are how ITS is being used to really, or AI is being used to make our mobility networks more intelligent to serve people walking, biking, etc. There are tools that are being developed or were originally developed for autonomous vehicles that have benefits for people, whether it's LiDAR being posted at intersections to better understand what the flows are, how people bicycling or walking interact with vehicles, understanding near miss incidents instead of waiting for a crash, is incredibly helpful, because it means we have more data to help understand how roadways should be designed. Haya brought up the great, kind of AI being baked into micromobility devices. When micromobility devices, they were really, at least in Los Angeles, they're really seen as a nuisance on the sidewalk. And how can we use that AI to help them move themselves out of the way when they're not parked in the designated kind of parking zone, and they're creating accessibility challenge for anybody on the sidewalk, but really people that might be relying on wheelchairs and might have less flexibility. And I think, it's really about how do we think about AI and new technologies in a way that benefits people, rather than just the movement of vehicles in general. And I think we're in that space where we're seeing a lot of OEMs and service providers bring that question to heart and bring that question to their vision. So excited about the work that Haya is doing and other companies are doing as well.
Absolutely, and let's talk then. Let's talk about near miss incidents and how you mentioned obviously the Pedestrian Defense program you've got going on. I think you've started to explain this, the pair of you, but how can we use AI to protect non-users, other road users, pedestrians, like I said, wheelchair users? How can we use LiDAR and AR both on traffic intersections or on micromobility vehicles to make sure that everyone's safe?
Yeah, so Pedestrian Defense is basically using onboard scooter technology and AI to detect unsafe riding behavior. I mean, if we take an example, let's say you're going opposite like the direction, basically what happens is that the scooter is able to warn rider in real time, emitting either visual or audio notification. So we have a light on the handlebar that would say, yeah, red, or you're not going in the right direction. And in case of a very critical situation, it could even slow or stop the vehicle. So we can even, geofence the sidewalks to say, oh yeah, you're on a sidewalk. Now we're just going to slow it down on the critical sidewalks of the city. So basically the vehicle is able to detect behaviors and emit signals to the riders. And I think the biggest the really important point here is that feedback to the riders and ability to identify rider patterns. There are a lot of other implications. Is basically the system is analyzing every ride and every rider, and every journey is resulting in an individual safety rating. We use AI to calculate changes in the performance of behavior and understand what safe riding looks like in any circumstances. Basically, sorry, my dogs get excited because someone is on the floor.
Just loves AI.
And you use this to educate users. And safe riding, you could receive rewards, so you could get discounts on your next ride, which would eventually lead to safer riding. You could get scoring, etc. And if you're not doing, safe riding, you could potentially receive a warning. We could work with, depending on the needs of every city, to ban users for a certain period of time. You could also target education, because once the safety rating is generated, once you identify what are some of the issues, is it sidewalk riding? Is it basically aggressive riding, we call it, etc. You could select certain education topic and send targeted messaging and targeted education to riders to basically, continue to kind of educate them on some of those issues. So there's that bit. And then there is the policing of sidewalk. I mean, sidewalk pavement riding is a major issue in a lot of the cities, and using a range of mechanisms, the AI can actually detect when the rider is on a pavement, and it could actually just stop the scooter immediately or slow it down to a safe stop. And this would, this is really innovative, and it would finally kind of solve the problem with sidewalk ridings. We know that scooters are extremely popular, but they have also been very criticized for, being where, we're not supposed to be. And this is really important because this is pedestrian safety, and, sidewalks and pavements are for pedestrians, and using technology, using AI to actually prevent scooters from being on the sidewalk. That is basically really gonna, I think, change things for micromobility in a very positive way, because it would allow cities to bring more e-scooters to their cities if some of those criticisms is basically addressed. So I think this is really great. It kind of plays into our ultimate objective of getting people out of the car, getting people to use smaller vehicles that are better from a sustainability perspective and better for our cities.
I think you're absolutely right, Hi, and I just wanted to reflect on something that Rogelio said earlier, in that there were mistakes made early on. I think we can all agree that with the introduction of micromobility, which has made some people and even cities wary of it. Do you think, Rogelio, that implementing AI in this way can help perhaps reassure people and put some minds at rest when it comes to introducing micromobility modes into big cities like Los Angeles, like London?
I think so. And I actually would walk back what you said about, there being mistakes being made. We're all learning, right? We were all in a position of really rolling out new technologies and new mobility tools for the first time. So I think cities also need to be a little bit more flexible and understanding, it's an iterative environment. So we really need to kind of facilitate an environment where companies are getting feedback from city agencies as well as community members to understand how are their devices and their tools actually operating in the environment and actually tackling challenges and creating new ones, and how do we collaborate to solve those new challenges. Nothing happens in a vacuum. So it really just is about kind of a continual iterative experience and understanding what can every technology bring to the mobility experience, and also how can we challenge or ask for more out of these technologies. We're currently working with a personal delivery device company, KiwiBot, here in Los Angeles to refine how their sensors and cameras, which help their robots get along, collect data that could be helpful for doling out maintenance dollars in the city, right? By understanding what the conditions are of sidewalks or where there are or are not public benches or other public amenities. Having that data is just another way in which a new technology, which is coming to the city, providing a new mobility solution that frankly was not imagined 10 years ago, is providing additional value beyond what the company's market niche may or may not be.
I want to return to near miss internet for just a second, because I think that's a fascinating innovation within the transport industry. But just pick up on something you said there about cities needing to be more flexible. Do you think that flexibility exists at the moment? Is there enough of it in big regional governments such as London, Los Angeles, Paris, etc.? And if not, how can cities become more flexible? Is it a case of just getting used to new technology like the stuff that you've just been recounting, or does it need to be a shift in thinking? Does it need to be more work done from our side on the industry to reassure people? How do we help people become more flexible and implement more technology?
Yeah, I think there needs to be a little bit of patience on both ends, right? I think public industry or private industry really wants to come into a space and show what they can do, right? For better or worse, public agencies don't really work that way. So we need to have that understanding of how public entities work. They have long procurement processes to make sure that their specific needs are met. But the challenge with new technologies is that cities can't procure what they don't know. So that's where Urban Movement Labs comes in Los Angeles. And there are other organizations doing the same thing and really facilitating pilot projects to understand what are these new technologies? How can we pilot them in a limited geography for a limited time to understand what the potential is here, how they actually tackle pilot problems. And I think piloting efforts really kind of help provide kind of a mutual understanding between private providers and public agencies to understand how these new technologies can be rolled into the existing mobility infrastructure, and also kind of helps relieve kind of concerns of whether or not an application may be appropriate for a city. Let me know if you think that actually answers the question, Joshua. Happy to revisit.
No, I think it does answer the question. It is a big question, probably with no immediate answers. I'll just pose a second one to the both of you. Do you think there is enough trust between private and public sector when it comes to implementing new technology? Do you think the public sector, in terms of regional governments, trusts private firms to responsibly introduce the kind of technology that we've been speaking about?
Joey, do you want to take that one? Or?
Yeah, sure. I can take I'd be very curious, Haya, about your perspective. No, I don't think there's a lot of trust. I think there's a lot of caution on both sides, right? We're in the space where public agencies speak one language and private entities speak a different language. And myself, as part of Urban Movement Labs, I often find ourselves in the middle trying to translate for one another. In conversations that a private entity you may see as combative is actually just the public agency, covering their own interests and covering their risk opportunities. So it's really about kind of framing conversations. How do we find a common language so that private entities and public agencies can really kind of communicate on the same level? How do we get them to align on goals and metrics? Public agencies have very different goals than private entities, right? Private entities, at the end of the day, need to make a buck. So how do we make sure that private entities are clued in and framing their business model in a way that, yes, makes revenue, but also helps public agencies accomplish their broader goals in mobility, whether it's sustainability, connectivity, accessibility, et cetera. So I think a lot of it is just there needs to be kind of a step back and kind of working in good faith. That it doesn't always happen, right? And that's that's kind of a historic way in which cities interact with private entities, whether they're in the mobility technology space or otherwise.
I think you're absolutely right. And hi, anything to add from your perspective?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess to the earlier question, like how can this help cities? I mean, I think going back a little bit to the pedestrian defense, what happens is through this new AI technology, cities are able to understand a little bit better about the safety performance of those programs, like what's happening exactly and what factors in the city are actually contributing to those safety scores and affecting the safety of their riders. Like, for example, road works or availability of bike lanes. Are there certain areas in the city where there is a safety issue? Are there certain times of the day where there's congestion and an issue? And they could do this analysis around, holidays, seasonality, time of day, roadworks, infrastructure, etc. And we could help them with that analysis and provide infrastructure recommendation. And those trends, I think, are quite useful. And they could also compare it with other cities, so they would be able to track their data and see, this is the safety of the program. These are the safety scores of the riders. Are there variances across different cities, regions, and globes to kind of verify their approach and identify maybe improvements in the road? Because of course, safety is, we can do what we can do, but of course, a scooter rider is safer when they are on a bike lane. It's just as simple as that. And sometimes people go to the sidewalk because they don't feel safe maybe on the road. So there's always a reason behind some of the issues that we see. And so we will be implementing a dashboard called Civic Insights, and we really can understand and dig into rider behavior in details thanks to AI. We'll be able to identify wealth of data and be able to kind of pinpoint what are the hotspots of unsafe riding by geography, by time, etc. And I think this is really super useful. So your second question about the trust and the expectations of cities. I mean, I think the trust is there is very high expectations, and maybe sometimes, to Rogelia's point, you need to give time to experiment with those technologies, and it's a learning process. It's not like we learn together and we improve. Like for us, for example, this new technology is new after having operated now in a few cities, having seen what are the biggest issues, what are the biggest problem. So I think it's really important to keep that dialogue and to keep the expectations also like realistic. So to give an example, like we can implement this technology across the city, but we need to also start with areas that are problematic, with a certain number of scooters, with a certain number of riders, etc. And I think that's really important that we keep that more realistic rather than immediately go into mapping every single street. I think that in terms of the trust, the trust is there, but it's just sometimes maybe it's more of understanding each other and speaking the same language on some of those things. We as a company, my philosophy is to be super transparent and just say things exactly the way they are, which maybe sometimes it works, and sometimes I don't. This is my approach is let's be frank, let's tell you exactly what works, what doesn't, what are the limitations. Every technology has always its limitations, has always its implementations, etc. So the approach is really to be honest, and I think that is honesty and that open communication is how you build trust with cities. And in my experience with SP, we've really had a really good relationship with cities, because although the answer isn't always yes, sometimes it is no, but at least we're being honest about it. And I think that's what's really important, because they can trust our word and that they can count on us as a partner. And it's a journey where we keep on learning and keep on improving. So I think that's my view on it.
Again, I think you're spot on there. Myself and Leah, who some of you in the audience might have seen earlier this week, we visited a couple of micromobility operators that have just launched in London. London's quite late to the party in that respect in terms of its tender process. And that was their philosophy: transparency all the way. Let's provide as much information to, in this case, TfL, as we possibly can, because that's the only way you're going to build trust and build that relationship, so that in 3-4 years' time, you can turn around and say, hey, can we introduce this? And the local government says, yeah, you can, because you've got a track record of being honest with us. Really, I just wanted to return to something that you mentioned earlier, because it did pique my interest. You mentioned using LiDAR and AI to keep other road users safe, and to even work out how busy a particular pedestrian crossing is, for example. Can you expand a little bit on that?
Yeah, so Oh, sorry.
No, for both of you.
Go for it.
Both of you.
No, hi,
No, go for it.
you've
Please,
got.
you're the
Go for
expert.
it,
Go
really.
for it. No, please.
I wouldn't call myself an expert. We're all dabbling in this space together, right? We're actually working with a couple of companies that kind of develop LiDAR technologies, but I think in Los Angeles, one of the big questions or one of the big goals is traffic safety. We have Vision Zero here in Los Angeles, which was launched about 5 years ago. We've had a few roadway redesigns, but we're really with in the last year, we've seen a lot more speeding on our roadways, as I'm sure you have as well, as traffic declines, and it's unfortunate how much traffic was really kind of helping manage traffic safety in a very in a very high level way, and really not in a high quality way. But having the roadways emptied really resulted in the onset of people speeding, and unfortunately a lot more deaths and incidents on our roadways here in Los Angeles. So LiDAR has really been coming to the forefront as like, how can we better understand how streets are as an environment for pedestrians without necessarily needing to look at crash data. And LiDAR provides the opportunity to understand what movements are happening, what are near miss situations, and what patterns emerge there. And this can be a standalone LiDAR applications, or also information coming from autonomous vehicles that are testing on the streets. So, kind of to wrap up, and kind of a narrative that I'm not sure I know where it's going anymore. It's really figuring out LiDAR has applications for data collection in many different senses. How do we challenge it to do data collection in a way that benefits people or protects safety for people that are walking or bicycling in environments with vehicles?
Yeah, maybe if I can add something. So I want to explain a little bit better the kind of the pedestrian defense technology, and from a technological perspective, how it works. It's actually very different. We use a patented technology. We hold 2/3 of all the patents that are in the industry, and we're able to achieve centimeter level of accuracy in the scooter position through the onboard geofence that I've discussed. It's actually kind of a combination between wheel speed data, GPS sensors, and the microcomputers that are all working together. And we use fuses to create this extra accurate position that I think at this point no one else is able to create, with an advanced machine learning algorithm. And this proprietary technology instantly knows exactly where the scooter is and how it is positioned, and how the rider feels actually in real time. So they really are able to provide aggregate data and show us exactly what are the trip characteristics, what is the rider compliance, what is the scooter behavior, what is the rider behavior, and generate this really wealth of data. This is very, to really provide you with real-time kind of insights on how the riders are traveling, and alert you to specific areas where the behavior, like hard braking, swerving, etc., what is happening exactly, or behavior that is through the detection, what I mentioned, like going in a walk in a wrong way, etc. And to do this, you require it's really designed for each city. So when we are working on a safety score, what I mentioned, we will be collaborating with the city to identify what are specific characteristics that we want to work on, like, for example, bike lanes or directional lane or sidewalks. What are those areas, and what are the rules that govern and what is unsafe behavior? So what is the formula that says this is unsafe behavior if you go on that sidewalk, or if you go the other way, etc. And then you would be able to detect a rider traveling the wrong way, or going on the sidewalk, or braking abruptly in a certain situation, and you could adjust the rule to the context, which is what is really quite innovative about this. You can adjust it for geography, you could adjust it for even time of the day, and so you could really create those rules together with the city partner, and basically through the onboard technology, through the pedestrian defense, detect very quite complex, I would say, riding score and real-time feedback to the rider, which is where the light or the audio or another thing would actually pinpoint what are the rules and when is the rider going against the rules.
That's really interesting, and particularly the ability to adapt, I think, is key to city to city. Obviously, Civic Pedestrian operates in so many cities around the world. Los Angeles is very, very different to Paris, and Paris is very, very different to Beijing, for example. So I think that ability to adapt and not just have a one-size-fits-all is going to be absolutely crucial as we move forwards. Yeah,
exactly.
No,
specifically, I was going to say also specifically being able to make this technology work in cities like London or LA, where you have really high-rise buildings, and that's why the onboard technology is here actually able to solve the problem of GPS inaccuracy, because you will be able, through this combination of methods, to have this very accurate centimeter level positioning, which is really key to all of this, because between a sidewalk and a bike lane, there is not a lot of space, and if your GPS inaccuracy is meters, then there's just no way for you. And further, there are a lot of further applications for that to so basically everything I kind of mentioned is just the start. We're working on a lot of further applications that would allow to also solve a lot more problems that cities face with some of those like rider behaviors and
Can it assist with parking violations as well? Everyone that I speak to, their biggest problem with micromobility, whether it's scooters or e-bikes, is parking. Can it help that?
It's basically also applicable for parking.
So you could tell straight away if a scooter's not parked in the correct bay, for example, and then send out a team to move it.
Exactly. And this we could already do even without PD scooter, but with PD scooters, you could actually map the parking areas in a centimeter level accuracy, which also is great. The other benefit to this, I mean, I know that other different operators are experimenting with different technologies, and maybe some of us have heard about vision. The problem with the benefit that this has is more scalable. So we will be basically, every scooter will be producing will be a PD scooter, and it's really scalable. And this is what the beauty is, because those are thousands and thousands of vehicles. And so it's the scalability of this and the ability for this to remain, functioning in a very good way. The sustainability of it is also quite superior. So I think this is what we're really aiming for, is not for kind of a solution that is only applicable to 10 vehicles, but more like thousands and thousands of vehicles across the world. So I think the scalability is really key here.
George has posed a really, really good question. And again, I'll put this to the floor so the pair of you can answer. Are you bringing AI or machine learning expertise in-house, or outsourcing it at this point, partnering with vertical AI solution providers?
So is this a question to me?
To both of you.
Jump in whenever you like. We've acquired Navmatics and we've brought it in-house. We already had, as I mentioned, as a company, we've been in this space since 2013. We've leveraged what we call vehicle intelligence system, which is a technology that we work on for more than 5 years. And this is basically, as I mentioned, patented technology. We kind of combine it with the recent acquisition of Navmatics as well, which has another further technology that allowed us to create together the Pedestrian Defense. So we have all of this in-house as a company. One of the differentiators is that we don't buy like the scooter of the vehicle. We actually basically do everything ourselves, from designing to implementing to running the shared e-scooter program. So it's really like a fully vertically integrated. We're doing everything from A to Z. And we're a bit geeky as a company, and we love the technology. And I see us as, I always say, we're not a shared e-scooter operator. We're a technology company that is doing shared e-scooters. And we'll be doing a lot more in the micromobility space. But we're always working on improving that technology. We're not looking for ready-made solutions. We're looking to kind of, because the beauty of this is, because we're doing both the operations and the technology, we get to learn a lot, because we try something, we implement it in an operational environment, then we get feedback, and then we kind of modify the vehicle accordingly, and that allows us to basically implement programs that are really tailored to the needs of the cities, to what works operationally. And another point I haven't mentioned, what works economically also for us as a company. because this is also like where we're also thinking as a business. That's why the scooters, we think about them as a very sustainable. We think about the unit economics, the cost of adding all those, complex technologies and doing it in a way that is actually scalable and sustainable for us as a business as well.
Thank you very much. And really, if I just switch the question slightly to you, because as I said earlier, you find yourself quite often in the middle of things, and you sometimes work with private firms and often sit in the middle of those and bigger local government. Do you see a future where local government and PTAs actually use AI in-house and start having AI departments in-house rather than outsourcing, or perhaps they're doing it already?
I think so, and to what scale is to be determined, right? I think that public agencies are really finding or having a difficult time with keeping up with the expertise of being data or being agencies that interact very intimately with data and technology. So while I don't know that I can answer the question about whether or not they're going to bring AI in-house, but I think they're at the very least identifying that expertise and bring the expertise about how to manage and talk about AI and other technologies in-house, because they need to be able to speak the language so they can understand what offerings are available to them from new companies such as Super Pedestrian.
Obviously, in the title of this webinar, we've used the word application, and I think that's a really, really important word. Do you think that if cities were to go in-house with AI, they'd be better placed to applicate the technology? Do they understand their city in a better way than perhaps a private company that provides AI technology does, and therefore they can apply it in a better way?
I'd be hard pressed to say yes or no either way, right? I think we need to think about what are the goals of public agencies, and public agencies have the role of facilitating public resources. And if that is their primary goal, then innovating or changing or creating new AI tools may not be at the forefront or their cup of tea, right? So I would be hesitant to agree with that statement, Josh, and say that instead of public agencies leading on the AI front, they need to sit at the table to be collaborative and advise on how to best use these technologies and apply them so they can communicate what are the existing challenges, and then we can have like that brainstorming session that happens between public entities and private entities to understand, okay, how do we actually create solutions? But I would be hesitant to say public agencies need to be the driver in all cases. Hi, I'd be really curious to hear your thoughts on that question, actually.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you, Rogelio. I do think so. They need to drive it, and yeah, completely agree.
Fantastic stuff. Perhaps if we just move in a slightly different direction, a lot of today's been dominated by talk of sustainability. We don't make an apology for that. It's a massive issue within the transport industry. Obviously, we've just come off the back of COP26. How is AI helping the transport industry to be more sustainable? I know you mentioned a little bit earlier that it can improve the lifespan of scooters, for example. How is this technology being applied to make our transport systems more sustainable? Again, I'll throw that out to both of you. So who wants to jump in first?
I think I can speak in broad brushes here, and Hai might have a more specific example. But I think AI and transportation technology, and pardon me, my dog is squeaking next to me.
No problem.
I think are all bringing to light new potential technologies and applications. And it's really about how do we fit all these different pieces together in a way that actually helps move people and things in a way that creates options and helps people meet their mobility demands in a more effective manner. I think we're still kind of being strung up by the challenge of operating within the what has been the popular model of car ownership and lack of investment of alternatives, at least here in Los Angeles. So there's also, I'm very curious to see how new technology helps facilitate a culture shift. And I think we started to see how new technology can facilitate this new thinking of mobility in general. As somebody that really started in planning and transportation as a bicycle advocate, it was really interesting to see how scooters kind of help facilitate a conversation among people that were never supportive of bicycle lanes, saying, we need to rethink our streets. We need more space for these scooters. They don't belong on the sidewalk. They need their own space. And it's like, yes, we need something called the bicycle lane. It'd be great if we had more of those in Los Angeles. We don't. So I'm really interested to see how we can leverage new technologies and new mobility options to have broader conversations about how we allocate roadway space and think about mobility infrastructure in general.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think it's about data, and this is why we're like investing heavily, not just in the pedestrian defense technology, but also the insight, the insight dashboard that I talk about. Because when you have this comprehensive data, I mean, we generate a wealth of data from our technology. When we're able to share it in a way that you could, visualize safety statistics over time, and basically map it against existing infrastructures and potential hazards to identify where does unsafe riding occurs, I think it's much more easier to kind of build the case towards building more infrastructure or more bike lanes, etc. The other bit is to measure the potential impact of street improvements. So our, the Civic Insight dashboard is not just like, it kind of actually it could actually forecast for you the impact of a potential policy and infrastructure change on the safety. So you could see like more, concretely, if I am to build a new bike lane, or if I am to implement a slow ride zone, how would that improve the condition in a high crash area, for example, and prevent accidents? So this type of analysis can inform a city's plan basically, and make sure that it's that it's achieving that those objectives. Basically the other thing is also like to able to identify where are some of the issues. There's a little bit of here of some of the disadvantaged communities, and this is a really good way to promote like transportation equity. So for example, if it's a certain area in LA or in London where you're having more issues, more accidents, etc., it can really highlight the differences between, it can bring color to like the different the communities, etc., and guide really investments from the cities, or where are the most problematic areas, what is exactly happening, and how can we improve this further. I mean, I guess like one last point, kind of leaving technology aside, I think that in general investing in more bike lanes is happening more and more, like because of the scooter boom and other micro vehicles boom, and I see that like is going to happen more and more. I think the more people leave their car a little bit behind and use scooters and vehicles that are more appropriate for the trips, the sort of trips, and also for a one-person trip, because majority of the trip are actually one-person trip where you don't need a big car for that. So the more you have users, I think what I have seen is that usage numbers and the just the facts of the popularity of some of those micromobility vehicles also helps a lot in making the case of, okay, these are a lot of users, these are million of trips, and if we want to really be serious about sustainability, like we're already seeing that people are using them. So I think the best way to kind of motivate change is to have kind of change, if that makes sense, because if we're talking in a theory, and that's why I'm always I always say to cities, if you're doubtful, just try it out, like have a pilot program and see how does this work for your city, because we can talk in the academic or the theory of how all of this work, but unless you have a pilot in London or in LA or in whatever city, you can't really get the actual like insights of how this works in your city on your roads.
No, absolutely. We've had some really interesting discussions on roadway usage and shared space this week, and we continue to do so as the event goes on. I think you're both absolutely right. I think there has been a shift in the last few years towards changing the way we dedicate space, and if AI can help with that and provide cities with the right data, then I think that can only be a good thing. One thing that we've spoken about in preparation for today's session is public sentiment towards artificial intelligence. I could be wrong. I think we as people have an inherent distrust of artificial intelligence. Obviously, you're both working in the field, so you might disagree. I think through maybe perhaps pop culture and through films, we're told not to trust anything that can think for itself, that hasn't got a beating heart. How do we change that? How do we bring people along for the journey and really change public sentiment when it comes to applying AI in our cities?
Do we have that? I was not aware. I
Perhaps you don't have
I
that.
love AI. I'm biased here. I did not know that existed. Rosalie, do you want to take that one?
Sure. So Josh, I think actually you hit on a great point. You know, when it comes to surveys associated with vehicle sales, people are really excited and want vehicles with those safety considerations of like lane management or the automatic braking that helps prevent crashes, right? And that's all technology that is helping to pave the road for automation, at least in the vehicle space. But when you ask people if they feel comfortable, stepping into a fully, automated vehicle, more than half of people are like, no way, time out, this is weird. So there's data to back up what you're saying, Josh. I think the way in which we really address it is really by socializing and having careful conversations with communities. And I think to do that, you really need to do the hard work of having kind of a grassroots focus interaction to introduce and socialize different technologies with communities. I think that's one of the benefits of pilot projects. It gives us the opportunities to introduce and really kind of be in this space where it's like, we know there's a new technology. We want to understand how you will use it as an individual, what concerns it brings. And in terms of who's responsible, I think it's responsibility both of private industry and of public entities, right? It's something that needs to be done collaboratively. We can't repeat what was done 5-6 years ago when micromobility first showed up and just drop it on street corners and let it figure itself out. I think we're playing with just more and more congestion and more competition on sidewalks and on our curb spaces. So it's really about how are we proactive in facilitating conversations with community members and really doing the difficult work of socializing technologies into our environments.
Yeah, so if I may add to that, so I mean, I guess when we talk about like negative perception of AI, I'm thinking a little bit about riders as well, because that's one thing that we thought a lot about. Like a rider is not going to like it if his scooter suddenly stops riding or slows down when he goes, on a street. And what if there's like no other way to go? And there are, so for me, the biggest part is really communication. So that's why we're making sure that they get like, that we explain what are the different colors on the scooter that will give feedback, or that there is some audio feedback, and that they would understand exactly what is going on. Because for me, that's really the biggest thing is really communication and education, so that they know what is exactly happening. When AI is implemented in a vehicle that they are using personally, that they might not like, that this vehicle is controlling a little bit their behavior, which might be, by some riders that might be complaining. I remember seeing one comment last week from one of our riders saying that our scooters, we're the only scooter company that like the geofence works, and it's so annoying because all the other companies, there's a geofence, but it doesn't work. And he finds it like extremely annoying that he can't go on the boardwalk in some city. So it's, it's not very popular sometimes. So I do agree, I do see the point. So I think that communication is very important, just explaining why we're doing this and making sure they have like, communication. It also, this is one of the things why we actually postponed the launch of this technology, because we also wanted to make sure that we're not making bad judgment where we're not supposed to. So we're not telling someone you're riding aggressively through AI when they're actually not, and it's just like wrong analysis of data. So that's why we're spending a lot of time in the, testing of this to make sure it's actually kind of, appropriate. I mean, I think when it comes to more autonomous vehicles, etc., that's a whole different, I think, world with a lot of different sentiments on it, I guess. And again, in my opinion, the most important thing there is really, communication, community engagement, and having that open conversation with the communities around it. Because if you're bringing autonomous vehicles, or if you're bringing, I don't know, scooters that repark themselves, or vehicles that are, delivery vehicles, autonomous delivery, all of those fantastic technologies that could bring a lot of value to the society, but at the same time, there has to be an open conversation and just like a dialogue where we don't tell, the communities what we're bringing, but hear from them. This is the idea. What do you think? And that community engagement and taking the time, like before the introduction of any program, during the program and after the program, to kind of listen to them and try and, basically address at least some of their concerns, and have that open dialogue. For me, that's really what matters. Listening is key here. Whenever we introduce anything, I mean, any new mobility, we're all sharing the road. I guess, like, to finish with that point, we're all sharing the road, we're all sharing that public space, and we need to do it in a very responsible way, and in a way that, like, we're understanding that the needs of others are different from our needs, and how are we going to, basically create a situation where both needs are met, or, yeah. So I'll stop here.
I think community engagement is absolutely key, and you both spoke about sort of winning the hearts and minds of people. And I just want to reflect on something Rogelio said just a second ago, and this is perhaps a question for a psychology conference, not for a transport one, but it absolutely fascinates me. Why don't we want to take that last step? We're, as you said, we're more than happy for cars to park themselves, to change lanes. I would imagine we're happy for a scooter to park itself as well, but why don't we trust it that last little step? I just wonder what your thoughts are on that. Why don't we trust a scooter when it tells us to slow down, or a car when it drives itself?
I too many people watch The Terminator. No, I'm kidding. I actually think that would be a better conversation with a psychologist in mind, or having a psychologist.
Computers are taking over, I guess. No?
Yeah, I really do think it's just about familiarity, right? We're creatures of comfort. We understand our transportation environment as it's been for the last 50 years or so. And any big changes, raise concerns, raise questions. Even scooters took a good year and a half to kind of settle and be accepted here in Los Angeles. For the first 9 months or so, they were getting thrown in trees or in rivers. So for better or worse, I think it's just part of the learning curve, and I think it takes some time for people to become familiar with something that's new, and kind of taking space in an environment that they're not familiar seeing them in.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, to be honest, Rogelio, they still get thrown sometimes. It has not stopped, unfortunately. So I sometimes get photos that I wonder, like, how did it get there, and why? Like, why would anyone do that? But anyways, I mean, I think that, like, the thing is, sometimes, like, I engage with a lot of different people on this topic, and I hear from some of the communities saying we don't like scooters, and I'm like, they bother us. They're there parked. I'm like, does it bother you that cars are parked there? What about if there are designated parking areas that you understand this is scooter parking? Does it still bother you? Yes, it still bothers us. But do cars bother you? No, they don't. They're okay. Well, yeah, because cars have been around for a lot. So yeah, they're fine. How about that one car is actually 15 scooters or 15 bikes? So, and if it's a shared scooter, so if you're talking about a shared scooter taking a place, like, take one private car, put 15 shared bikes or scooters, they get utilized 5 times per day, or whatever number of times you want to calculate, and make the calculation for yourself. So one car making 1 trip per day versus 15 scooters making 5 trips per day, which one is serving more needs in the community? And I think this is the problem. No one is bothered with cars parked around. I am, but not a lot of people are. So I guess this is where, like, it's about what Rogelio said. It's really about what you're familiar with. And I think now, like, we're becoming more familiar with, like, scooters and bikes, and in the future, I don't know what other vehicles may come. But it's just that normal kind of change management, I would say, that what we're used to is okay, and what is new is not, or it's like, it's a bit shocking sometimes.
Hi, I was just going to actually add to that, as you actually just reminded me of, we've been doing some research on electric mopeds, right? Like the shared moped model, and how, they're not scooters, they're not shared vehicles, but they kind of fill a gap there, right? To kind of fill, shorter trips. And in cities like San Francisco or DC, you're able to park them anywhere. And the cities get complaints from folks saying, like, why is there this scooter parked here? It's in my neighborhood. And it's really interesting to kind of hear how the cities have kind of managed those conversations, and over a few months have been able to reduce how many people call in frustrated, right? And for them, the conversation has been like, a bit painful, but has been talking about the points that you brought up, Haya. Like, this is not a vehicle. We're actually reducing how much curb in your neighborhood is going to be used by private vehicles. Having the scooter is used in the same way as all the cars on your block. They're used to help your neighbors make trips. They help your neighbors go to their groceries or get to the destinations or their doctor's appointments in the same way. And it's, how do we get people to understand like all these tools do the same thing that cars do, but more sustainable, more efficiently, and just add some variety to life.
So yeah, I agree. I mean, Rogelio, if I may say what the solution is. So the solution is that there needs to be designated parking that is clear. Where can you leave those vehicles? And I sometimes have like conversations with cities where they tell us, okay, you cannot park here, otherwise you get fined. So okay, where can we park? Oh no, there's nowhere. It's everywhere is fined. So I'm like, okay, we have to find like parking locations. And I compliment a lot of the cities that have already reallocated, took place from cars, like Paris, like Lisbon, like a lot of cities actually all across Europe, also in the US, and gave to bikes and scooters, because if there is no place to park them, then yeah, I do understand if free floating is is very convenient. The issue is the convenience is extremely important, because why people like the car? I think people like the car because it's convenient. That's like the first reason. And we need to make shared transport transport solutions as convenient as your own private car. And that is doable, but it has to be within reach. Like, you cannot walk 5 kilometers to find a scooter that you're going to use to go on a trip of 2 kilometers. That does not work. There needs to be enough density. There needs to be enough availability. In the same way that you want your bus to come on time so you can depend on it, you want your scooter to be there so that you can depend on it. And that dependability is really like what drives the basically convenience. And for you to actually say, you know what, I don't need a car. I mean, I live in the Netherlands. I don't have a car. I haven't owned a car for, I think 12 years. Because, I have my bike and we just bike around here. But if I want another form of transport, there are shared mopeds, there's shared electric cargo bikes if I want to go with my kids. If I want to have a car, there is an Uber, there is another shared car. There are like, I think 4 or 5 different shared cars right now. There's even a shared Tesla, new company that started here in the neighborhood. So there are a lot of options, and those optionalities that are dependable, because that's really the key, is the dependability, how dependable is the option. And going a little bit back to the cities, when cities formulate their policies, they need to think about users as well of those modes of transport, and how can we encourage them to depend on those modes. And so that's where I think so basically designating specific areas for different, and rethinking our streets. I just want to finish with that point, rethinking our streets, because those streets were designed is really long time ago, where all those vehicles did not exist. So are we expecting, with the same way, I would say we need to reclaim our streets. We need to encourage shared use, and we need to think together about all those different modes and how they connect together, and redesign our street in a way that is more matching the needs of today versus, the needs of yesterday.
That's an excellent point. Really great point. Certainly London streets were designed for horses and carts, and there aren't many of those looking around anymore. So I think a big rethink is needed. I'm aware that we're rapidly running out of time. Rogelio, is there anything that you wanted to add just to finish on?
I think the one thing I'll add, and I think Haya really kind of hit it on the mark about having to rethink our streets and really design for people, not necessarily a specific type of transportation like we did 100 years ago for the auto, at least here in the US. But also we need a lot more spaces for people to share their findings and companies to collaborate with one another. And I know that's a difficult thing to do. As companies are inherently competing with one another. But there are so many new mobility technologies that are more or less asking similar questions. And there's a lot of strength in collaboration, sharing lessons. So I think really The only thing I'll say is we need more collaboration within companies, between companies and public agencies, and including community members.
I think again, an excellent point. And as we've spoken about at length today, we have to take people along for the journey and win those hearts and minds. So I think more collaboration in this field can only be a good thing. That is all we've got time for. Could have spoken for another half an hour easily. Some really, really brilliant points and some excellent insight. So please do join me in thanking Haya and Rogelio for their time today and their expertise. And with that, day 4 of Transport Innovation Summit draws to a close. It's been a fantastic day of discussion. And I can't wait to get straight back into it tomorrow morning for the 5th and final day of the conference. So I'll be back on your screens tomorrow. I'll hopefully see many of you then. But once again, please do join me in thanking our panelists for their time and expertise. And I will see you in the morning. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Ross. Thanks, Rogelio. Bye.
Pleasure.